You may not be sure about the sound because I haven't been speaking. So now I am speaking. So hopefully in a moment you will be able to see me, and hear me, because there is a 30 to 40 second time delay. Okay, I hope that people are able to hear me now. Can't hear me still. It works, Nicoletta. Right, okay. I'm going to keep talking. I will keep talking, and hopefully people will be able to hear me as well as see me. Nicoletta, can you hear me? Right, let's see whether people can hear me as well. I am now talking all the time. A load of old rubbish to see whether I'm testing as to whether or not people can hear me. Can you hear me? Please let me know by sending me. You can hear me, yes. Okay, so Nicoletta can hear me. Marie, can you hear me? Because Nicoletta can, so it sounds like the sound is working as well from my end. As soon as Marie tells me she can hear me, we will start the webinar. A little bit late, but hey-ho. Okay, how are we going? No, Marie, okay. Okay, Marie, I don't know what the problem is. Have you got your sound on? Is your sound turned up all the way? Just double check to see whether or not your sound is on. Nicoletta, I'm really sorry. We're just going to have a short delay to try and make sure we can get Marie online to be able to hear me as well as see me. I'll just send you a message in case you didn't get that. Yep, we're on. Okay, so we're both on. Everybody can hear me. It's all fabulous. Great. And everybody's obviously been accessing the chat button, and we're all ready to go. Okay, we're running a few minutes late, and this is going to be a long session, but I'm hoping that what I will do is I can't imagine anybody's going to want to be sitting in front of a computer staring at me or listening to me for 3 hours. So it will probably be less than that. But what I will do is, obviously, if you do have specific questions on certain aspects that you feel I may have not given enough information, then please do let me know. Marie, I can't remember whether you, I don't think you sat in on the Europe for Citizens yesterday, did you? No, I don't think you did. So never mind. I was going to cut that one out because I know Nicoletta did, but we'll keep going. I'm not sure where the other delegates are, but we have 2 people signed up. That's good enough to go. Okay, off we go. Let me just transfer over to the... Okay, you should now be able to see the slides. And what I will do is I will just go through the slides. I will stop every so often and go back and talk about, and look at the chat session to see whether or not anybody has sent me any questions. If you want to send me a question, then please do so using the chat function, and I'll check that every 10 minutes or so to see how we are going. Okay. Right, we are going to be looking at opportunities for arts, culture, heritage, and the creative industries from the European Union. I'll do a little bit of background. We'll talk about the structural funds and Interreg. We'll talk about the external actions. We'll have a little bit of a break, and then we'll talk about the transnational funds. This is obviously a fairly intense session, so we won't go into great detail about any of these programs, but we will certainly cover the overview and give you a breadth of information about the various opportunities. The Interact, just use the chat. Never mind the Q&A and the hand up. Actually, I must change this slide because the chat is the easiest and quickest way of communicating with me, and I will check that every 10 minutes or so. The 2 key background documents that you simply need to be aware of, because they do sort of govern the way in which funding is allocated, are what it says in the treaties, which is the legal statements governing what the European Union can do and cannot do, and the current mission statement of the European Union. So what is its current set of objectives for the current 7-year period, or 10-year period, as it turns out. This is Article 167 of the treaties. Hopefully you will all have received the copy of the text of these slides, which I sent first thing this morning. I'm sorry I wasn't able to send it before now, but at least you will have that. The Article 167, the flowering of the cultures of the member states. This quite clearly says that the EU can't tread on the toes of member states, or it can't duplicate the way in which member states might choose to fund their own key theatres or museums and galleries and opera houses and so on. What it can do is it can support the cultures of the member states, particularly looking at the diversity of the member states and bringing the common cultural heritage to the fore. They make an emphasis of common cultural heritage. What is it that we share across the borders between the member states? And obviously the sort of things that we share, or that we might share but we're not aware that we share, could be the focus for application. So this is quite important, particularly in terms of the culture program, this notion of common cultural heritage. They want to bring people together across the member state borders. Europe 2020 is the name of the current mission statement of the European Union. Every 10 years there's a new mission statement. This is the current one, which lasts from 2010 to 2020. This just gives you a summary of the broad themes of what the European Union is trying to do at the moment. And obviously these themes are reflected in the funding program. So the closer a particular theme is to a funding program, then the larger the amount of money that are available, the bigger the budgets and so on. There is absolutely nothing there which says culture. So what happens is, although there is a separate culture program and there's also the citizenship program, these have relatively small budgets. And even those programs, particularly the culture program, what they are introducing this time round is they're introducing these sorts of themes into the criteria. So in a sense, the closer you are to addressing some of these themes, even in programs like the culture program, the greater the chances of success in terms of making an application. Putting theory into practice, just a couple of practical points about the way in which the European Union functions, just so you're clear about that. There are three key bodies: the tripartite way of running things, the Commission, which is the bureaucracy, in a sense the most important because it gives away the money. So if you're making applications or dealing with people who've given away money, it's the Commission you deal with. I mean, sometimes indirectly, because some funds are devolved to member states. Some funds you apply directly to the Commission in Brussels. Others, funding may be devolved, but the Commission has overview of the way in which the money is spent. The Parliament represents the people, and that has a sort of policy-making role rather than any sort of involvement in the decisions about funding. And the European Council represents the member states. So that's a big series of ongoing meetings of all the ministers from the different member states. The ministers of finance have been meeting in Brussels from all the different member states. George Osborne has been there, talking about Greece and all those sorts of problems. And at the end of every 6 months, there is the heads of state get together. These are a bit more frequent recently because of various crises in the European Union, but that's what is termed the Council and the Council of Ministers. There are lots of other bodies, you don't need to worry about them at this point. The agency at the very bottom, what has happened is that the Commission is now setting up a series of independent agencies for some of the programs to manage the actual day-to-day process. So in terms of, if you want to make an application and you want to download the information or download the application forms, these days for education, audiovisual and culture, there is this agency There's a new set of commissioners since the end of last year. There are 28 commissioners, one from each member state. They have a responsibility, a portfolio. The current Commissioner for Education, Culture, Youth and Sport is Mr. Navracsics, who is from Hungary. The media program, interestingly, although it's in the same division of the Commission, it's in a different a portfolio. It's now under Digital Economy and Society. Gunther Oettinger from Germany is the commissioner there. And Europe for Citizens comes under the Migration, Home Affairs and Citizenship portfolio, which is Mr. Avramopoulos from Greece. So you can just see the sorts of range of commissioners there. So these commissioners I put up are all commissioners who are responsible for programs which might fund, or are certainly able to fund, projects for arts, culture and so on. There's no need for you necessarily to have any relationship with any of these commissioners. It's just to give you an idea of how things function. In the European Parliament, if you're interested, there is a Culture and Education Committee, which has responsibility for all those sorts of areas. There's nothing wrong with sending members of the Culture Committee information about what you're doing. It's very easy to do that. You can go to that website and you can search for your MEPs from your country who sit on this particular committee, and you can add their emails to your mailing list. It's all quite public information. I just point out for anybody in the UK that Julie Ward, who is an MEP for the North West for the Labour Party, is one of the very, very few MEPs ever who sit on this committee who has a background in the arts. Julie has run a middle-scale theatre company in her previous life, and so she does actually understand some of the challenges of small and middle-scale arts organisations, not just sort of large-scale arts organisations as well. So she's a good person to add to a mailing list if you want to keep people informed. There are other committees as well, as you can see on that list there. Okay. Moving on to the funding programs. There are three types of funding programs: structural funds, transnational, and the external actions. The structural funds is the money that is given to help different regions of Europe, particularly the disadvantaged regions, to be less disadvantaged. So money invested in individual regions to help those regions grow economically and so on. The key thing about most of the structural funds is that you do not need partners from any other country. It's a matter of, you get money for doing a project within that particular region of that country in order to sort of make that economically better. The transnational funds, as the name implies, are about bringing people together from different European member states and other countries in order to work collaboratively, do projects, undertake mobility, and so on. Then there is the external actions. The external actions is assistance for countries outside the European Union. We will talk briefly about those as well. Okay. The budget split of the European Union. I just put this slide in just to make it absolutely clear that the structural funds take most of the European money. So it's nearly 3/4 of the European budget goes on the structural funds, so helping the disadvantaged regions. So in many ways, what the European Union is doing in terms of finance is redistributing the wealth of Europe to try and help the poorer regions do better. That's 75% of the budget is doing, 73%. The transnational funds are 15%, the external actions 6%, and then the costs of running the whole shebang are another 6%. So we're going to look at the structural funds. Before I look at the structural funds, I'm just going to take a quick look back at the to see whether anybody has. Marie, you didn't get the thing this morning. Let me just. Okay. Right, Marie, I can't actually check again just at the moment because I'm in the middle of this, but I'm really sorry. It was definitely sent out first thing this morning, but I will resend it. So you will have a copy of the text of all these slides that you can print out and so on. I'm really sorry for some reason it didn't get through. It certainly should have got through to you this morning. It was sent to everybody at about 8:30 this morning, 8:30, 9 o'clock at UK time. So I will double check when I get back. So I'm sorry about that. Okay, I'm going to go back to the slides. Okay, back to the structural funds. Right, structural funds. The structural funds, the key concept to get hold of is that there are a group of funds and then there are mechanisms by which these funds are spent. Okay, so a group of funds, including things which I'm sure everybody will have heard of, like ERDF and ESF, and then mechanisms to spend the funds. Essentially two mechanisms. One is the mechanism based purely on an decision as to the economic status, which are the worst off regions, middling regions, and the better off regions. And then the Interreg program is the other one. So categories of economic status and the Interreg program are the two ways in which these funds are allocated. But I'll explain this in a bit more detail. The differences, just so we're absolutely clear, between the structural funds and the transnational funds. The structural funds have this geographical focus. Transnational funds are pan-European. Structural funds, for most of them, you don't need partners. You do for Interreg. For transnational funds, partners from different countries are essential. So obviously bringing people together is important. The structural funds also actually involve devolved decision making. So the money is given back to the member states, and the member states make decisions about the allocation of these funds. The transnational funds, on the other hand, most transnational funds, the majority of them, you send your applications to Brussels, wherever you are in the European Union. A few of them have devolved funding. I'll explain that in a moment, but mostly it's centralized. The structural funds have very large funds to be accessed. I mean, you could do very large-scale projects. I mean, it's economic development, so this could involve economic regeneration through building new roads and bridges and restoring seafronts and all sorts of things like that, which could cost, millions and millions of euros. Their focus, in order to capital works and people-based activities, training, skills development, getting people ready for the job market, and so on. Transnational funds, pan-European focus, as I've said all those. They focus on short-term projects, small to medium-sized grants. That's slightly misleading, actually, because depending on the transnational funds, you can get larger grants, 4 or 5 million euros for some of the transnational funds. I'll explain the levels of funding when we look at the individual programs. Okay. The overall aim to reduce regional disparities in terms of income, wealth, and opportunities. Those are the funds: Cohesion Fund, ERDF, ESF, Agriculture Fund, and the Fisheries Fund. Those are the various funds. The Cohesion Fund doesn't apply to the UK or other Northern European countries. It's essentially for Mediterranean countries like Spain and Portugal and so on. But the four funds that are most relevant are ERDF, ESF, Agriculture, and in some cases Fisheries as well. These are the different allocations. So the less developed regions include those countries there. The transition regions, parts of many member states are still transition regions. There are none at all in those countries that are listed there. And then the more developed regions are everywhere else. And the way the money is allocated is that the money is allocated via ministries or agencies in each of the member states at the national or regional level. And then separately, there is the Interreg program, European Territorial Cooperation, and that is allocated by individual secretariats for each of the individual substrands of the Interreg program. And I'll explain the different substrands of Interreg a bit later on. This is the map showing who gets what. You'll see that the less developed regions, which are the worst off regions in red, no surprises, Eastern Europe, Greece, southern Italy, a bit of Spain, Portugal. There's a couple of bits left in the UK, you will see. Cornwall and West Wales are still classified as less developed regions. The darker beige is the transition regions, and then the light beige are what are called the more developed regions. If you want some information about all this, then there are various websites that are listed there. Again, this is all on your handout that you can follow up, which gives some case studies, and I've particularly listed the ones that give case studies of examples of particular projects. I've got a few case studies coming up in a moment here as well. In terms of what can be supported by these funds, ERDF and ESF are listed there, and this is sort of taken from the European Commission's own website. That gives you the list of the sorts of areas that ERDF and ESF can provide funding in, and you'll see that the Commission has made it clear that they can support arts, culture, heritage, and so on. This is a typical example of an ERDF project where they've converted the old Waterford factory into a cultural centre and a visitor centre and so on. And you will see that got 2.76 of ERDF money. Second example here is Abertay University. I put this in because this is a slightly different example. This example is where money was given for the development of video games activities. So you can see that ERDF, isn't just about infrastructure. There are other opportunities for spending ERDF money. This is a very typical ESF project. This is an ESF project where they have a small-scale organisation has got ESF money to provide training based on arts and cultural sector to help young people aged 16 to 18 to find work in the creative industries. This is another example where DB8 has used creative and media opportunities to provide skills and additional help to young people in Brighton and Hove area. Okay, they're the typical examples of ESF used to develop training programs. Mechanisms for allocation in the UK. So in terms of the UK, the less developed regions, as I explained, are Cornwall and West Wales. The transition regions are all the ones that are listed there, and the more developed regions is everywhere else. So you can see that in the UK, that's the particular breakdown of which region fits into which category. How does it work? So what are the structures for the allocation of structural funds in the UK? There are similar structures in every country of Europe. So the money comes from the European Union to the member state. In this case, the UK. Because it's a large member state, the money then goes from the UK national government or central government to the various English regions and also to Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. There are intermediary bodies that are then responsible. In the English regions, this is now the local enterprise partnerships, and if anybody is interested in accessing the structural funds, then you need to contact the local enterprise partnerships. And there is a local enterprise partnership website and so on. I've also put some other websites down there for ERDF, ESF, and EAFRD here in the UK. So again, you can see that this is money that comes back, it's devolved from the European Union to the member state, and in the case of a large state, it's then devolved further. There'll be similar arrangements in all the different member states of the European Union. This is the diagram which shows how it happens in the UK. So you can see that there is a combined EU growth programme with ERDF, ESF, bits of agriculture. There's a separate rural programme and a fisheries programme as well. And at the very bottom, you'll see project proposals coming up, and the LEPs are guiding the funding, and there are HMG's, Her Majesty's Government, teams which will assist and advise in these particular programmes. How it works in the UK is that there is a national operational programme which sets out the guidelines, the national operational programme for England, and there'll be one for Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland. And these operational programmes essentially merge the European Union criteria with the economic development criteria in that particular region or nation, and they form what are called the operational programme. Applications are then made to a centralised managing agency in most cases. For the ESF, there are opportunities to go down what is called the opt-in route, where some of the money is allocated via other agencies, such as the Skills Development Agency and the Big Lottery Fund. This is a bit complicated. If you've got specific questions about how this works in the UK, then please don't hesitate to contact me. As alongside the operational programs, each of the LEPs, of course, has written their own strategic plan, and any application that goes into the centralised managing agency has to also meet the criteria for the ESIF strategy, the European Structural Investment Fund strategies that develop for that particular LEP. So if you're applying in Manchester, you meet the criteria for the operational programme for England, and you also have to meet the criteria for the LEP for Manchester. So there's several. It's a bit complicated. We did some analysis about, the place of culture in these strategies that have been written by the various LEPs and so on, and the results weren't terribly good. Culture didn't have a very high profile, which is a bit sad, but we're hopeful that there will be applications in the future, because certainly structural funds can be used to fund arts and cultural projects. Finally, just to sort of say a few brief words about the agricultural fund. The EAFRD now does encompass a greater focus on rural regeneration, and you'll see that this particular regulation which talks about spending money on cultural activities, natural heritage, and so on. And there's also the LEADER program, which is money that is spent by local action groups. And LEADER funding in the past, as you'll see from this particular table, there have been many projects in the cultural area that have been funded through the LEADER scheme, and we're hopeful this may happen in the future as well. So that's a quick overview of the main structural funds. I'm just going to sort of briefly stop and go back and just check whether anybody has any questions, because that is a little complicated. Not at this stage, no. Okay, well, I'm just going to keep going. If you have any questions, then just please do send them via the chat button, and I will answer them the next break. Interreg. Okay, Interreg program uses structural funds, but is done quite differently, involving partnerships. Again, if you look at the Interreg guidelines, you'll see that it is possible to spend Interreg money on arts, culture, creative industries, and so on. Again, the focus has to be on economic development, regeneration, and so on and so forth, but it is certainly possible to spend arts and culture money in that way as well. Okay, European Territorial Cooperation is the full name of the Interreg program. This is same goals as structural funds, but transnational. There are 3 strands, and each of the first 2 strands has a vast number of sub-strands. So there's masses of sub-strands here, 60 or more across Europe in A and B, but they are all based on geographical areas. So depending on where you are, it's likely that there'll only be 2 or 3 at the most that will be relevant to your particular situation. So you don't need to worry about the fact that there are dozens and dozens of sub-strands. because in most cases they won't apply to you. Okay. This is Strand A. Now, Strand A is cross-border cooperation, quite a simple principle. If you look at the border between France and Spain, you'll see yellow bits on either side of the border, and the idea is that those yellow bits will cooperate across that particular border to undertake projects based on economic development, growth and jobs and so on, but involving partners from those two areas. In the UK, you'll see that there are 4 different programs. There is the cross-channel program, and there is the 2 Seas program. Now, they're slightly different on the other side of the channel in terms of who can participate, but it's the same areas on this side of the channel. So if you're anywhere between Cornwall and Norfolk, along the south coast and south and east coast of England, then you can participate in either the cross-channel program, which is the blue bits of France, or the 2 Seas program, which is the sort of orangey red bits of France and Belgium and the Netherlands. There is also a Strand A for West Wales and the part of the Republic of Ireland, and there's also one which does bits of Scotland, west of Scotland, Northern Ireland, and the northern part of the Republic of Ireland as well. Okay, so those are the 3 different strands there. Examples of the priorities here. I've just given an example. You can see an example there. In Strand, one of the cross-channel and 2 Seas programs in the past year, these are some of the many cultural projects that have been supported through this particular strand. And this was in the last program, but we're hopeful there'll be a similar number that will be supported in the new strand as well. And all of these are listed on the handout that you have, or you will have, when I check to see what's happened to it. Right, Strand B is slightly different. This is not so much about cross-border. This is about working within a grouping of regional areas. It's a little easier to see on this slide. So you'll see that there are 10 regional groups across Europe, and the UK, depending on where you are in the UK, is eligible for 4 of these. The very top 2, you'll see the green one is the Northwest Europe, and the whole of the UK can participate in that one with Northern France, West Germany, Luxembourg, Belgium, and Southern Netherlands. The next, that's North Sea, so that's the east of UK, with all those other regions around the North Sea. On the next row, the 3rd one along, the blue Atlantic route, is the west side of the UK with the Republic of Ireland and other countries around the Atlantic. And then next to that, the northern periphery, is Scotland and Northern Ireland participating with the Republic of Ireland and other parts, mainly Scandinavia, in what is called the northern periphery. But you see other countries can participate in other regions as well. You'll see at the very bottom on the far right, the Baltic Sea is another one that Denmark can participate in, for example. So there are several that the different countries can participate in this particular program. Some examples of the priorities for the Northwest Europe, North Sea and the Atlantic area programs are given here. I'm not going to go through these in great detail at this stage, partly because this is the past program, so there will be new priorities announced shortly. This is a project example. A lot of these, because of the focus on regeneration, are in the cultural area, they're focused on creative industries. So this was a northern periphery one called Creative Edge, which had partners in Ireland, Sweden, and Finland. This was a Northwest Europe project called Open Innovation, which involved partners in UK, France, Germany, Ireland, and Belgium. I put this in because I thought Popcorn Horror was quite an entertaining project. You see a smartphone app connecting horror film fans by streaming the best short horror films from around the world. That seemed to me to be a rather entertaining and interesting project. Interreg Europe Strand C. Now, Strand C doesn't give away project grants in quite the same way, but what it does do is it sets up platforms and networks to share examples of good practice in the other Interreg strands. And it's quite interesting to sort of see what these particular strands are up to. So you may want to have a look at those particular strands at some point. They're quite interesting, but they're examples of projects rather than giving money away to fund new projects. So it's A and B that give the funds away. There are the various websites. As I said, each of these secretariats runs independently. So they all have their own criteria, their own deadlines, their own information, and so on and so forth. The Northwest Europe is the first one which has announced a call for proposals, and the deadline for the first concept notes is the 18th of May, which is next week. So I wouldn't bother to get started on that one. There'll be another call for concept notes in November of this year. So if you're interested in one of those, then, and the other ones will no doubt be announcing their calls any minute. Okay, external actions. Now, once again, before we go on to the external actions, let me just double check to see if anybody has asked any questions. Nope, good. We'll keep going. We'll keep going if I can get back to them. Okay. Now, I'm going to go through this section quite quickly as well, because the external actions are about other countries. And although there are programs for other countries, I think one of the key things is that there have been a few changes which may mean that these programs are less relevant. But just so you're aware, there are three types of categories of programs here. Ones that are aimed at the countries who are trying to join the European Union, one section aimed at other countries around the EU, and the other one which is aimed at the rest of the world. Okay. It's a bit complicated because these programs are sort of funded through different bits of the European Commission. The Directorate General for Enlargement, the Directorate General for Aid, and the External Action Service all have a role in different parts of these programs. The bottom bullet point there, what's happening is that the rules for involving third country partners, which is what the rest of the world is known as in European jargon, they're known as third country partners. The rules are changing in the transnational funds, and it's now a lot easier to involve a third country partner. So if you wanted to do work with, Serbia or India or the United States or wherever it might be, it's now slightly easier to involve them as a partner in the transnational funds. So rather than having to go through these programs, which are a bit complicated and so on, you may find that it's actually easier to try and involve them as a partner in a standard transnational fund. I'll explain that a bit more when we look at the transnational funds. One other key principle, which is the first bullet point here, is that these funds are devolved. So therefore, it's quite a good idea if you're thinking about trying to go down the route of one of these external action programs and you've got somebody, well, the first thing is to really, they're not really relevant if you're just sort of starting out and think, oh, wouldn't it be nice if I could do a project in Brazil? These funds aren't for that approach, okay? These funds are more on the basis that you may have come across somebody from Brazil and you've got on really well with them and you'd like to do a project with their company or organization or whatever. And it may be that is a good starting point. Your Brazilian contact, however, really needs to make contact with the Office of the European Commission in Brazil, because a lot of these funds are devolved. They're devolved, and the European Commission, their office in Brazil, has a role in making decisions and recommendations about how these funds are allocated. So, you may not know that the European Commission has an office in every country of the world, but they do. It's a bit like an embassy, but they're not called embassies because the European Commission obviously is not a country. But they do have an office in every country, and what your Brazilian mate needs to do is make contact with the EU office in Brazil, in Brasilia, and find out what's going on, and get themselves on the newsletter mailing list of the EU office in Brazil, or whichever country it is you're talking about. And that's one way of finding out what opportunities happen in these other parts of the world. Okay, looking at these individual programs, the pre-accession countries, in other words, these are the countries who have indicated that they would like to join the European Union. The program here is known as the IPA, the Instrument for Pre-Accession Assistance. There are 5 component parts. The eligible countries include Turkey, Macedonia, Albania, Bosnia, Kosovo, Montenegro, Serbia. they're not particularly focused on culture, but they will fund cultural projects from time to time if there is a clear benefit that's going to help them, usually in economic terms, as they get ready to try and join the EU. I mean, obviously, these countries have to reach a certain level of economic performance, and a whole host of other areas as well, before they can join the European Union. And it may be that, for example, here were some cultural projects that were designed to help improve the economic performance, in this case in rural areas, and these involve partners from other EU member states who went and worked with these countries in their rural areas to help foster rural cultural tourism in this particular example. The neighbourhood countries goes under the European Neighbourhood and Partnership Instrument. There are two parts here, Euromed and Euro-East. The Euromed covers North Africa and the Middle East, and the Euro-East covers the former Soviet Union and the Caucasus. The Euromed strand and the Euro-East strand have both had sub-strands which have covered culture. But once more, these, you can more easily involve partners from these countries as standard associated partners in the transnational funds. And also, there's been a lobby on the behalf of these countries to try and become eligible, fully eligible countries for some of the transnational programs. So, for example, in the culture program, the transnational culture program under Creative Europe, Georgia and Moldova have recently become accepted as eligible countries. So many of these countries are now also moving to be eligible within the transnational fund. So another reason why it may be that this program is less important. Links with other countries. A lot of this comes under the Europe Aid budget. The Europe Aid budget is very supportive of arts, culture and creative industries. They have supported a number of projects and a number of programs. One of the main ones is the ACP program, which is the African, Caribbean, Pacific countries. And you'll see that from that website, there is an ACP Cultures strand. And the ACP Cultures strand has provided a number of support for a number of different projects in these areas, in these particular countries. There is some support for other parts of the world, Asia, Latin America, North America, but they tend to be less open to cultural projects. They're often about academic exchange and less about culture. But Africa, Caribbean, Pacific under the ACP program has certainly provided support for culture in the past. Okay, so we're going to move on to the transnational funds. Once again, I'm just going to do a quick check back to make sure there are no additional questions at this point. Okay, Nicoletta has asked about the structural funds, whether they are projects run by private organizations or only public. It can certainly be private organizations. There's absolutely, in terms of the structural funds, there are no rules that they have to be profit-making. In fact, most of the projects are run by private companies, particularly if they're construction projects. Then it may well be private companies. Some of them will be subcontracted private companies, but there's nothing wrong with small businesses that are profit-making applying for these funds. I mean, you have to be clear that the projects aren't going to necessarily make a profit. That's the project shouldn't be profit-making, but it's perfectly possible that the partners involved could be profit-making organizations. And this is quite common now across the European Union. There are only a small number of programs where you actually have to be not-for-profit in order to apply. Even in the culture program or Creative Europe program these days, you can be a profit-making organization to make an application. So they're quite open to private companies making applications, although there are strict rules about projects not creating a profit for any of the partners that are involved. Okay, so I hope that answers that question. I'm going to go back to the transnational funds. Okay, so I'm going to do a quick summary of the transnational funds, then we'll have a short break, and then we'll go on to look at the other funds as well. Okay, transnational funds. You remember what I said earlier about these. These are some of the examples that we'll look at briefly. COSME, LIFE, Horizon 2020. You'll see a wide variety of budgets. Horizon 2020 is nearly 80 billion euros, whereas Europe for Citizens is tiny compared to that. It's only 200 million euros. In fact, I think it's now a bit less than that. So a wide variety of budgets. Within the transnational funds, there are two different types of grants available: project grants and mobility grants. Now, project grants involve at least 3 different countries, organizations from 3 different countries who come together to provide or develop some sort of interesting collaborative project that's going to involve all the partners in some, almost equal way. These have to be project grants. They can't be used as annual revenue funding. The Commission is not allowed to provide annual revenue funding. That's the job of individual member states and so on. Mobility activities cover individuals or groups going on visits or exchanges. Some programs offer both mobility and project grants. Other programs offer just project grants. So, for example, the culture program only offers project grants. So there are only some programs that offer both mobility and projects. Wide range of different themes and topics, as we will see. Links to Europe 2020. Again, the influence of Europe 2020 can be seen in all these different programs. And if you're applying for a project grant, there is usually some requirement for some sort of match funding. But depending on the program, in some programs, that's a very strict requirement about exactly how much you have to put in and so on and so forth. In other programs, it's much more fluid. Okay, so as I said, these are some of the strands which we are going to look at. There are a whole host of other transnational funding programs, but they're not relevant to arts and culture. They're ones that are listed below. COSME is aimed, and this is particularly aimed at small and medium enterprises, which presumably will be profit-making, or at least they will hope to be profit-making at some point in their lives. This is any organization with 250 or fewer employees. That seems to cover the entire cultural sector, as far as I can tell. And the reason I put this up is that although this is run, you'll see from the website, after ec.europa.eu, it says enterprise. This is run by the DG for enterprise, or the DG for business. But there has been a push, particularly by the culture part of the EU, to make sure that the creative industries are well represented. So this program is indeed open to any sort of business working in arts, culture, heritage, creative industries, and so on. There are a range of different options and programs and schemes and so on that are operated here. If you're interested, the best thing to do is to contact the Enterprise Europe contact point that's closest to you, and you can find a list of the Enterprise Europe contact points at that website below, and that covers Enterprise Europe contact points across the whole of the European Union. For all of these transnational funds, there should be a contact point in each member state, at least one contact point in each member state for all of these programs, and their job is to provide information and guidance to help people become aware of the program and to access it. Life Plus, this is the Environment and Climate Change Program. You'll see there are 2 sub-strands, climate action and environment. The environment program has in the past provided support for cultural heritage, where it's sort of been the natural heritage, so landscapes and gardens and so on. So this may be relevant to a few organizations. Interestingly, this is one of the funding programs where you'll see towards the bottom it says 80% of the funds have been devolved to the member states. So this is one of the programs where you do not apply to Brussels. For many of the strands, you apply to the contact point. So the contact point is not just an information source, but it's also a funding delivery mechanism. So you can make an application to the contact point in your member state rather than having to make an application directly to Brussels. In the UK, the organization is Beta Europe, and that's their website there, but the contact points in other countries you can find from that particular website there. Right, moving on to Europe for Citizens. Now, this is one of the smaller programs, but it does provide opportunities which are fairly easy to apply and which I think are particularly relevant to arts and culture organizations because of the nature of the themes. I mean, this program overall, before we look at this particular strand that's on this slide, this program overall is about reminding people that they are citizens of Europe as well as citizens of their own member state, and providing support for activities that remind people of this, remind people of the history of how the European Union has evolved, and also try and engage people more in the democratic process that the European Union is trying to ensure that operates in the way in which it works and the way in which it makes decisions and so on and so forth. So it's about involvement of people. This first strand, European Remembrance, is a project strand, and this is for projects based on the themes that are listed in the second and third bullet points there. The second bullet point was the starting point for this particular program. It was limited to projects focusing on the causes of totalitarian regimes and so on. But it's now been expanded. And if you look at the third bullet point, you'll see other defining moments and reference points in recent European history, and preference to actions which encourage tolerance, mutual understanding, intercultural dialogue, and reconciliation. These are all very important themes and topics in the Europe of today, and cultural organizations are extremely well placed to make applications which address these particular themes through through theatre or dance or exhibitions or heritage or whatever it might be. You'll see any type of organization can apply, local authorities, research institutes, and so on and so forth. That does include cultural organizations and so on. This is a project strand in strand 1. Strand 2, there are 3 sub-strands in strand 2. The first 2 of these, town twinning and networks of towns, are mobility grants. So town twinning is only focused on town twinning associations and local authorities and so on. And network of towns, you can get together with other organizations in other towns and create a network. These are both mobility grants. So these are smaller amounts of money to undertake a series of mobilities, inviting people from your twin town to visit you, or having meetings between people from the members of the network of towns. And finally, the civil society projects is another project-based strand. These projects are reflection, debate, and other activities related to themes of the European Citizens Programme, and looking at ways in which you might engage European citizens more in discussions and debates about European Union policy and activities and so on. Given the fact that the UK has now voted in a government that is going to have a referendum on EU membership within the next 2 years, this seems to me to be a huge opportunity for organisations in the UK to take advantage of this particular programme. You'll see at the bottom there is a list of contact points. Sadly, there is no contact point. This is one of the few programmes for which there is no contact point in the UK. There is a contact point in most other countries, but not in the UK. We at Euclid are trying to provide a bit of extra advice and assistance for this particular programme. So please do feel free to contact us if you do have particular questions. Otherwise, you can contact the European Commission office directly. These are some examples of previous projects supported by the Europe for Citizens programme. The other point that I would make about Europe for Citizens programme is that it's infinitely easier to apply for than many other programs. The application forms are quite simple and straightforward, and the finances are based on a principle of lump sum funding. So unlike some programs where you have to put in a detailed budget and you have to report back on your detailed budget, for the Europe for Citizens program, you put in your funding is based on a formula. And the formula will be, will calculate the number of people involved in the mobility, the number of meetings you're having, and where they're coming from, and factors like that. And you'll be able to calculate instantly the amount you can apply for. So it's just based on lump sum funding. And this makes it much easier, not only for the application process, but also for the reporting back process. Reporting back on European funding can be a bit of a challenge, but for lump sum funding, it's much easier. Horizon 2020 is at the opposite end of the spectrum. So Erasmus was one of the smallest, Europe for Citizens is one of the smallest programs. Horizon 2020 is one of the largest. This is the framework program for research and innovation. So it's got 80 billion euros. nearly 80 billion euros, and that's because it offers support for research and innovation projects in almost every possible conceivable area you could imagine. You know, medicine, transport, engineering, everything. It comes under Horizon 2020. There are several strands to Horizon 2020. The most relevant strands to arts, culture, heritage, creative industries are the ones that are listed there. These are some of the deadlines in 2014 and 2015. You'll see under societal challenges, that is a mixture of academic research, you know, cultural opposition in the former socialist countries, with more pragmatic research, so innovation ecosystems of digital cultural assets. You'll see under ICT, there is a strand to support the growth of creative industry SMEs. There is even under the energy efficiency strand, there was one for energy strategies and solutions for the deep renovation of historic buildings. So there's a whole raft of different strands. It's primarily aimed at universities, research departments, research institutions, large-scale organizations. But it is possible to be part of a consortia of organizations making applications to Horizon 2020. So that's also relevant there. There is a whole raft, because it's such a huge program, there's a whole raft of contact points. So if you look at that, there's various websites there. One of the websites tells you who all the contact points are in the member states, or helps you find them. There's a UK website there. There is a national contact point for reflective societies, which is one of the main strands for culture and creativity. So they have their own contact point. So there's a contact point for the individual strands, not just for the program in this case, because it's such a large program. And there's also a thing called Europeana, which is Europe's digital heritage database. And they may be putting out calls for proposals as well. So it may be worthwhile having a look at Europeana, because if you're in the heritage sector, this may be relevant to the work that you're doing. That's it. That's the end of the first half. Now, I've got through that a little more quickly than I had anticipated, about an hour or so. I'm going to go back now and have a quick check to see whether anybody has any questions. Are there any questions? Right, there are no questions at this point. What we're going to do is I'm just going to have a 2-minute break because I've been talking non-stop. So we'll have a couple of minute break, and you can get a cup of coffee or something in the meantime, and then we'll go and look at the other programs. And by the other programs, I mean the programs for education and culture. So the Erasmus Plus program and the culture program will be the two programs that I'll look at in more detail. Please do let me know if you have questions or you'd like a bit more detail on any of the programs that we've covered to date. And either I can talk about them if you send a chat message, or if you send me an email, I can reply in more detail to you. So we'll just have a couple of minute break and we'll start again. I make it now 11:07, so we'll start at 10 past 11 or 10 past 12 if you're outside the UK. Okay, I hope everybody can still see me. We'll start again in about now. Right. I hope you're all replenished. Okay, we'll go back to the slides. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is go through the Erasmus Plus and the Creative Europe programs. Just throw in this particular slide just to sort of remind you that there are other resources out there apart from the European Union that might provide you with information and maybe some funding for projects and so on. The Council of Europe, of course, has been working in the area of culture. They don't have much money, so they don't give away large sums of money like the Commission does. But the Council of Europe is out there. They do some interesting work in the cultural area. They're involved in the cultural events label, Eurimage, and so on. UNESCO, although it's international, is also quite an interesting resource. They have a number of programs and projects as well. The Anna Lindh Euro-Mediterranean Foundation, which is based in Alexandria, does have some resources to support projects involving the countries of North Africa and the Middle East in projects with the European Union member states and so on. That might be worth looking at. And there are some contact points in each member state, or many of the member states, for the Anna Lindh Foundation. There's one in the UK based in Manchester. And then finally, just that point at the bottom, that there is a thing called the European Foundation Centre, which provides information on trusts and foundations across Europe that give money away for arts and culture projects. So that might also be of interest to some people. That's just some extra information. Okay, let's look at Erasmus Plus. Now, Erasmus Plus seems to either confuse or scare some people. I happen to think that Erasmus Plus is remarkably straightforward and relatively easy to apply for. But maybe that's just me. The Erasmus Plus program is a combination of the previous lifelong learning program and the previous youth in action program. So those lifelong learning covered education and training, and youth in action was obviously about young people, but they've been brought together. So Erasmus Plus covers education and training, as I've said, in the different areas: schools, vocational education, higher education, adult education, and lifelong learning. And young people, the definition of people is age 13 to 30, and people who work with young people, so youth workers, and also sport. And there are 3 strands of funding. The third strand, which is not listed there, is really about policy research and proposals and so on, and isn't really directly relevant to cultural organizations. But the first 2 strands are, the first strand is mobility, so small grants for individuals to go and meet other people and so on. I mean, the main reason you go for a mobility grant is to learn something. You've identified that somebody else somewhere in Europe is doing something that would be really interesting and beneficial to you, so you want to go off and learn about it, or to give you an opportunity to share your good practice. People have invited you to go and sort of talk to them about your good practice. So one way or the other, there's a learning opportunity going on there. The budget is 15 billion, roughly, and the key point about this is the magic word decentralized. Okay, so one of the main points about the Erasmus Plus program is that it operates on decentralized funding for the important bits. So this mobility and for the projects, they're both decentralized. So you don't apply to Brussels, you apply to your contact point in your own member state, which makes life a lot easier and quicker and simpler. It's quicker insofar as they make decisions more quickly, and it's simpler in terms of, again, the application forms and reporting back. And the other key thing about Erasmus Plus, which also makes it easier, is it also operates primarily on the basis of lump sum financing. So for these devolved strands, it's not a matter of creating detailed and complicated budgets like you do for the culture program. It's a matter of developing a relatively straightforward projects and calculating your funding on the basis of the sorts of calculations that we use for Europe for Citizens. In other words, the number of people involved, the length of the project, and so on and so forth. So it's lump sum funding, which does make life a lot easier. Decentralized, as I've said before, funds are handed back to be distributed via contact points, easiest funding to access. Only organizations can apply. Individuals cannot apply anymore. You used to be able to apply as an individual. You can't apply as an individual. You have to apply through an organization. I mean, you can still get a grant for you to go and do something, but the application has to come from an organization. The other thing I should say is that although, just to go back to this sheet here, where it says that there are mobility grants and project grants, there is, of course, a middle ground, which is you can use mobility grants to create a project. So, you can apply for a batch of mobility grants. And if you start applying for a batch of mobility grants, you could apply for 5 mobility grants, which is simply to send 5 people to go and visit somewhere else. But you could apply for 50 mobility grants, where you've got 5 people or 10 people from 5 different countries, all moving around Europe as part of a project. So, you can create a project using applications for mobility grants. And since it's easier to apply for mobility grants than it is to apply for project grants, that may be worth looking at. And certainly there have been some quite interesting and exciting projects that have been developed on the basis of applications for mobility grants. Okay, these are some previous project examples. Under Leonardo da Vinci was vocational training. Grundtvig was lifelong learning. So you can see that these programs have supported a number of cultural projects. Erasmus was higher education. Transversal covered a number of different educational training strands. So you can see that there have been a number of previous projects supported. The youth program is very much about helping young people, improve their key competences, skills, employability, social inclusion and well-being, and so on and so forth. And that's aimed at young people aged 13 to 30. There's a little flexibility you'll see in the bottom bullet point about applications to the youth strand. It's possible to apply as an informal group of young people. They do sort of make a little bit of a less of a restriction there. The Erasmus Plus Youth Program includes these are some of the past projects that have been included under the youth program. So again, you'll see quite a diverse range of projects that have been supported there under the different initiatives and so on in the past. There is also the sports strand, which allows access for grassroots sports activities, projects using sport in the context of education and training, and so on and so forth. So there's a number of different areas that sport can also be used for. So just in summary then, Key Action 1, mobility, the key thing is decentralized. I mean, you can see on that list at the bottom, there are also centralized, where you can apply to Brussels, but these are quite demanding and quite complicated, and we would not advise you to do that. We would advise to stick with the decentralized. So choose mobility and then choose which area you're looking at. Is it mobility for higher education students, vocational education, school staff, adult education staff, young people and youth workers, which area? I've picked out the adult education staff because for most cultural organizations, it seems that either you will be working in adult education, in other words, you'll be doing education and outreach programs as part of your organization's activities, or you'll be working with young people and youth workers. So those are the 2 main strands. It's very similar for projects. So Key Action 2, decentralized, and so projects, which they call strategic partnerships, for higher education, vocational, school, adult education, youth, and you can also apply for projects that cross more than one field. So those are the 2 different strands and the sub-strands you can apply for. So in summary, quite simple, strand 1, mobility, strand 2, projects, strand 3, I wouldn't worry about that. The UK contact point is listed there. You can find details of the other contact points on the European Commission's website. There are 2 contact points, ECORIS UK and British Council, who are the contact points here, and they've got phone numbers and websites that you can contact. The project strands have only one deadline each year, and that deadline is in March. So I'm afraid you missed that one. The mobility strands tend to have two deadlines each year in March and September, October. The youth program has three deadlines. So there was February, April, and October. The next deadlines for these programs is coming up in September, October. I should have said that the same thing applies for Europe for Citizens. They tend to operate two deadlines each year, March and September, for the mobility strands, and one deadline in March for the project strand. So that's the way in which both of those programs happen to operate. Okay. Right, before we go on to Creative Europe, I'm just going to go back once again and double check to see whether there are any questions that have come through. No questions at all on Erasmus+, so that's all blindingly clear. I do urge people to consider making an application to Erasmus+. It is, I think, one of the more straightforward. The application processes, the fact that it's devolved, the fact that it's lump sum funding, all of these are issues that, although it has to be focused on education, training, and young people, it's an easier fund to apply for than the culture program. People think the culture program is the only option, but actually it's one of the more complicated options. Okay, so let's look at Creative Europe then. This is the final program that I want to be looking at this particular seminar. Creative Europe is a support program for the overall culture and creative sector. So every culture and creative sector is here. At one point, we talk about the Creative Europe program as if it's one program. Of course, it isn't. What there is in the Creative Europe program is there are several programs, one for culture and one for media, and these have carried on from the previous culture program and the previous media program. And there will be a new financial facility, which I'll talk about a bit more in a moment. So there'll be three strands to Creative Europe. Two of them up and running now, the media program and the culture program, and one that will come on stream shortly. The key point at the bottom there is that the criteria in the past were a little bit more generous in terms of what you could actually apply for. They have moved a little bit more these days so that they are more focused on the Europe 2020 agenda, I suppose, in summary, looking at what they call the real needs of the sectors. I'm not completely convinced they know what the real needs are, but that's what they're saying. And the real needs in the sectors include the job creation potential, capacity building, digital agenda, innovation, and so on and so forth. So that's what they're particularly looking at. But one key point looking at this slide here is the definition is now very broad. At one point, you could have got the feeling that the culture program was focused only on a particular narrow definition of what arts and culture was about, but it is actually quite broad. You'll see here that all sectors whose activities are based on cultural values, artistic and creative expressions, market and non-market oriented, whatever type of structure carries them out, irrespective of how it's financed. Market or non-market oriented, it makes it absolutely clear that they're looking at projects which may be involved in the profit-making sector. Obviously they're trying to involve the creative industries, and the creative industries may well include organizations which are profit-making. Hopefully most creative industries will be profit-making at some point in their lifespan. The second bullet point just makes it clear that they're looking at the whole of the value chain in these sectors: development, creation, production, dissemination, preservation, and so on, as well as related functions like educational management. It then gives you a whole host of examples of different types of the cultural area. The only caveat there is saying that if it's exclusively audio-visual, then you can't apply to the culture program. You can apply to the culture program for a project which may involve audio-visual activity as one of the activities within the project, but it can't be solely audio-visual. Right, the financial facility. The financial facility, the aim here is to make it easier for SMEs in the creative and cultural sectors to access bank loans. This has been working quite well for the media program. They had a production guarantee fund, and they're going to set up this new financial facility, which means that you can go to your bank here in the UK or one of the nominated banks in the UK, and you can get a financial facility, which means you can then, a financial facility from the EU, which means you can then apply to your bank for a loan. So if you want to, extend your premises or buy some new equipment or whatever it might be, it's very difficult to get a loan from the bank at the moment because creative industries or cultural organizations don't have assets or collateral that banks like. So this is a way of trying to guarantee the way in which you can access a bank loan. Right, let's move on to the media program. The media program is quite focused. It's focused on helping the audiovisual industries across Europe, particularly film, but also television and the games industry, the video games industry as well is included here. They cover those sorts of areas that are there: capacity building and training, development of projects, distribution and sales, and film festivals. The key thing about the media program is that it's generally focused not on the production. You'll see that the second last bullet point does now provide some support for co-production on an international basis, but what they're really interested in is the bits at the beginning of the process. So in other words, training people for the sector and providing support for the development of projects. And then they're focused on the end of the sector. So once you have made your film or TV program, then getting it seen. So ways in which they can support the distribution and dissemination of this particular program, a particular project that you have undertaken. You'll see also the final bullet point there, audience development. Audience development is a very, very important new theme that the European Union has introduced, and it's particularly keen on this theme within the Creative Europe program, and it's even more keen on this theme within the culture program. So certainly audience development is something that you need to be looking at in terms of one of the themes or activities running through your project. There are lots of different strands for the media program: access to markets, development of games, development of projects, distribution, festivals, co-production, reaching audiences, and TV programming and training. And there's usually, a couple of deadlines each year for most of these strands. You need to sort of, follow the Creative Europe desk for the media program to find out what's going on. There is in some countries a combined Creative Europe desk. In many countries there is a Creative Europe desk for the media program and a Creative Europe desk for the culture program. You can find details of all the Creative Europe desks on that particular website. In the UK, the Creative Europe desk is run by the BFI, and that's their website and that's their email. And there are separate contact points in Scotland and Wales for the media program as well. So several deadlines a year under those different strands if you're involved in the media sector. Looking at the culture program then. Okay, so the culture program. Now, interestingly, the UK is getting better. And in fact, if you've seen the Condo, the collector's document that Euclid has just produced, you'll see that we have analysed the latest set of results, and the UK has done extremely well compared to the other big countries. It's certainly, it's done much better. So things are improving. But in the previous program, you'll see that the number of successes for the UK compared to another big country such as Italy was quite low, because if you see above the second row number of applicants, the UK was submitting far fewer applications. Now, the UK is now submitting more applications, so that's very good to hear. And their success rate is a little above, or it's around the European average, which is good. So we write good applications in the UK, and we're hopefully going to stimulate more applications in the future. In terms of the culture program, what are the objectives? Well, there are only 3 objectives for the culture program these days, and they are listed here. You'll see the first objective is to support the capacity of the sectors to operate transnationally and internationally. So the idea that they will work transnationally, across borders, internationally, and so on. Promote the circulation of works and the mobility of players. So they're very keen. Those two themes have been there forever. The circulation of works and the mobility of players have been around for a long time, and that's really important. You have to understand that these are collaborative projects. They want to make sure that there is work being circulated and mobility of cultural and creative players as well, particular artists. The second objective is about audience development. This is the new theme that I mentioned. They give lots of examples here: reaching new and enlarged audiences, improving access to cultural and creative works, particular focus on children, young people, people with disabilities, underrepresented groups, new and innovative ways with audiences, improving the experience, deepening the relationship, and so on. Contributing to innovation and creativity. That's the final one. Now, we're glad to see that innovation and creativity has made an appearance here. And they do talk about artistic innovation, but they also talk about some other interesting things that are very much there because of the Europe 2020 agenda. The testing of new business models, for example, the use of digital technologies, the promotion of innovative spillovers on other sectors. That last one is extraordinary. I mean, I think we understand what innovation means and what new business models might mean. Digital technologies, yes, new technologies and so on. Innovative spillovers in other sectors, what the hell does that mean? Essentially, what that really means is ways in which your project can be seen to be addressing some of the broader criteria that have been established, particularly those that are relevant to the Europe 2020 agenda. So, for example, if you're doing a project which might, for example, be doing theatre or puppetry on disadvantaged housing estates on the outskirts of a major city, and you're working with disadvantaged young people, if you can in some way demonstrate that those young people, through their participation in this program, have gained greater skills, if they are, that's going to help them do better in job interviews or get them on the bottom rungs of the ladder to getting a job and so on, then what you have done is your project has spillover, which is relevant to the big picture goal of Europe 2020 agenda, which is to address the problem of unemployment and help young people into work. So that's an innovative spillover from your particular project. The strands, old and new. The old strands included projects and a whole raft of others. The projects will continue. The projects is the main strand that is most relevant to people working in the cultural sector, and that will take 70% of the European Union budget. There will also be literary translation. So literary translation is also a strand. And there are going to be, the other strands there have all been incorporated into other areas or scrapped. Platforms. There are platforms which are quite different. I'll explain those in a moment. And there is also some support for European cultural networks, in other words, networks in a particular cultural area where you've got members all across over Europe, and some special actions. But the main focus is on projects. I'm going to briefly mention literary translation and platforms, but the main focus is on the projects. Literary translation. There's a summary here. This is for publishers or publishing houses to make applications to support a package of work which is going to be translated into and from and into one of the eligible languages. Note, this is only for fiction. It is not for non-fiction. This translation is only available for fiction. The eligible languages are languages of one of the eligible countries. You can also translate out of Latin or ancient Greek. There are two types, there are two categories: 2-year projects and framework projects, where you can get 100,000 per year. It's a 50-50 basis, so you have to put 50% of the funding in, and you can get 50% from the European Commission. You must be publishing houses active in the publishing sector, and they're also keen on this round to raise the profile of translators. So the translated book must include a full biography of the translator. This is fairly straightforward if you are interested in this particular field. Platforms. Platforms is something that's a bit new. There have been platforms, but in the past, platforms have been more thematically focused. These platforms are more art form focused. This is about support for cultural and creative organizations to showcase and present European creators and artists, particularly emerging talent. What they're really trying to do is to provide support to promote particular art forms, particular art form areas. So, you know, they will give you money, you and a large consortium. You can see you need at least 10 partners there. They'll give you a fairly large amount of money, and you'll see that further down, the intervention rate is 80%. So they will give you 80% of the costs of this project. And the idea is you and your 10 partners will go away, not necessarily doing one project. You may do a series of projects, but the result of this single project or this series of projects will be that at the end of the project period, the status and reputation of this particular art form and the profile of the emerging artist will have been hugely enhanced and increased. That's the idea behind this. There were 3 strands, 3 deadlines for this program, and 2 of them have now passed, I'm afraid. So there's only 1 deadline left, and that is in 2016. You will see at the bottom there that they're very keen on communication activities and a branding strategy, and maybe even the creation of a European quality label. This has happened already for the festivals. There is now a new quality label for European festivals that is being managed by a project run by the European Festivals Association. Okay, so that's platforms. So Creative Europe projects. I'm just going to stop briefly at this point and go back and just double check again to see whether or not anybody has any questions. No questions. Either everybody has stopped watching, or I have answered all the questions that you might need to know the answer to. Okay. Right, so projects. We're going to keep talking about projects. There are, apart from the general objectives, there are 6 priorities, and each project should address 1 or 2 of these particular priorities, and maybe 3 if you want to. These are the first 3 priorities. So supporting actions providing cultural players with skills, competences and know-how. Again, you'll see the same sort of things we've heard in the objectives about digital technologies, audience development, new business models. Supporting projects which are about international cooperation, helping artists internationalize their careers and activities, and also providing support to professional opportunities is the 3rd priority. The 4th priority is the most common one, in a sense, which is supporting international cultural activities, such as exhibitions, exchanges, festivals, performances, and so on. The 5th one is focused on literature. There's always one focused on literature, because literature does tend to be underfunded and under-resourced. And then the final one is the same as in the objective, which is audience development, and it's the same sorts of areas are listed again in terms of audience development. So a flexible approach. They're very keen that you consider, you don't have to, but they do seem to be quite keen that you consider a flexible interdisciplinary approach. You know, rather than 3 or 4 Baroque orchestras getting together to develop a project, maybe it might be a more interesting project if it's a Baroque orchestra working with a museum and a digital arts creative industries organization, or whatever it might be. So quite interested in interdisciplinary. They will expect projects to probably be not-for-profit, but that's not to say that you can't have profit-making organizations as partners in the project. So you can certainly have profit-making organizations as partners. The project itself can't make a profit, but that shouldn't stop, and it might make the project more interesting if you have a profit-based partner as one of the partners in the organization. There is a whole raft of things in the detailed guidance about subsidiarity, which is essentially to make sure the European Union is not funding activities that would be better funded by organizations based in the member states. I honestly don't think you need to worry too much about subsidiarity. It's not going to be a relevant issue in terms of cultural projects in the culture program, because you are going to be working with partners from different countries automatically, and that's not going to be something relevant to funding from individual member state funding agencies. So in terms of projects, there are essentially small projects and large projects. In the small projects, you have the project leader, plus 2 or more co-organizers, so 3 organizations from 3 different countries, and you can get up to 200,000 euros. In the large projects, you need to have up to 6 partners, so leader plus 5 co-organizers from 6 different countries. And you can get up to 2 million euros for the large projects. But you do have to have the other 2 million, because the large projects is on a 50-50 funding basis. For small projects, it's on a 60-40 funding basis. So that's a slightly easier funding basis to be looking at, because the Commission will give you 60%, and obviously 200,000 is slightly more manageable than 2 million in terms of what you might have to be finding. All projects can now run for a maximum of 4 years, so whether it's a small project or a large project. If you are doing a small project, we recommend you don't run it for 2 years, because that would probably be rather overdoing it. But it's certainly up to 2 years, 2 or 3 years maybe for a small project, and 3 or 4 years for a large project. And you can add in associate partners, which I was sort of hinting at when we talk about partners from 3rd countries in particular, and I'll explain that a little bit more in a moment. In terms of developing a successful project, we would propose that there are 3 strands to a successful project. There is the idea, so the project idea. You need an innovative, dynamic, exciting idea. There's the partnership. You need a strong partnership with partners from a range of different countries. And you need to deal with, obviously, the application forms. Now, people are intimidated by the application forms. Traditionally, application forms for European Union applications have been a bit onerous. They are getting a lot easier. They're still a bit more complicated for the culture program than they may be for Erasmus Plus and Europe for Citizens, but you should not be put off by the application forms. The real challenge is the bright idea and the strong partnership. If you're a Connexus member, then we do provide you with access to a range of documents and documentation, including the Am I Ready self-assessment template, which is available to Connexus members. Project examples. The Commission now gives you in their guidance notes a number of project examples, which are quite useful, but I do want to make a point about these project examples, which I'll make at the end. The project examples, here's the first example, which is performing arts, where cultural organizations get together to create some sort of co-production, which they might perform or tour in different venues in different member states. It does make the point here that it might be just a single event in one of the member states, on condition that the event has a large and recognized international reach with the capacity to have a multiplier effect. So if you are performing in one of the large European festivals, for example, Avignon or Edinburgh or Salzburg, then you might be able to get away with just performing in that particular event, because these events obviously have a large international reach. Otherwise, they would expect to see these performances or exhibitions occurring at least in each of the countries who are the partner organizations. Co-productions can include new or avant-garde works. You must include audience development activities. They should help people with their careers, reach more audiences across Europe and beyond, extend the lifespan of productions, and so on and so forth. So all sorts of examples of what you might do in a performance arts-based project. There are a couple of other project examples here about exchanges of cultural players with a view to capacity building, exchanges of cultural players between countries, including extended stays and residencies, helping people with the development of their careers. So you see the first one of these is very much about training and skills development, and the second one is about artistic and self-development for artists and creative practitioners. So exchanges which work on either of those themes are also potentially possible projects. Finally, this is particularly aimed at those cultural organizations which may not have living artists. So museums and some galleries and so on, heritage sites, they may not have living artists involved. So this is about exchanges of artifacts. So enabling new and existing works to circulate by touring exhibitions, by the loaning of exhibits, extending the lifespan of exhibitions, and so on and so forth. But I do want to make the point that all of those examples, they're good as a starting point, but they're only a starting point. What they're looking for, which obviously these examples don't give, is a level of innovation and good ideas. This is the project example, weather stations. And now, weather stations, it was a very innovative project where it was essentially what this project did was each of the partner countries commissioned a writer in residence from their country. And those writers in residence were sent to be resident in a weather station in another country. And when they were there, they were invited to reflect upon the impact of climate change in that other country and in Europe in the 21st century. So to have a big overview of the impact of climate change in Europe by being involved in a weather station in another country. Very simple idea. I mean, essentially that was the project. I mean, you can see at the bottom there was some outreach work and education work and so on. But essentially that was the project. It was a nice, simple project, but with a very innovative and unusual idea. Okay, project partners. Partners can come from any of the member states, and these rules and regulations here apply to the other programs as well, like Europe for Citizens and Erasmus+. Any member states are eligible. Then there are a range of other countries which are also eligible if they've signed an agreement to participate. Now, these agreements are signed per program, so you need to check for each individual program to see whether or not the country you're interested in has signed the agreement. So, for example, in the culture program, we have the EFTA countries, the free trade area countries, Norway and Iceland. We have the accession countries, Albania, Bosnia, Macedonia, Montenegro, and Serbia. I think we now do have Turkey. I think they have now signed up. We have the neighborhood countries, Georgia, Moldova. They have also signed up. You remember I said earlier on the neighborhood countries of North Africa, Middle East, the Caucasus, they were trying to become party to this program as well and to other transnational programs. And so far in the culture program, Georgia and Moldova have signed up, and there's talk of other partners coming in from other countries in those regions as well. So it's quite a broad range of country partners. Just to make the point that we have two types of countries then. We have the eligible countries and we have the non-eligible countries. Now, your lead organizer and your co-organizers, they all have to come from the eligible countries. But once you have them, once you have your minimum of 3 or 6, depending on whether you're going for small or large projects, you can now add in associate partners, and associate partners can come from anywhere. So you can have associate partners coming from anywhere in the world, which is what I was saying earlier about the third country opportunities. So, you know, this is where you can involve a partner from the United States or Uganda or Uruguay or anywhere else, but begins with U or any other letter. And the rules are now that you can spend up to 30% of your budget on the involvement of these associate partners. There are various restrictions, but it does mean that you are much easier to involve partners from these other countries than it may have been in the past. Number of partners. We always advise, and this applies to virtually any program, that you go for one more than the minimum number of partners. So if they say 3, well, you should try and go for 4. There are 2 reasons for this. One is that if the jury scores are tied, they do tend to give preference to the projects with the larger number of partners. The second point is really just a general insurance. If you're running a project and it runs into some difficulty with one of the partners and they've got problems, and if the worst comes to the worst, they have to drop out, if you only have 3 and 1 drops out, then your project becomes illegal and you have to stop and see what you can do about making your project legal again. Whereas if you have 4 partners, then 1 drops out, you've still got your 3, which is the eligible number, so you can keep going. So we always recommend try and have 1 more than the minimum number of partners. Where should partners come from? There is now a rule which says not your immediate neighbours. So once upon a time, you know, the UK was very good at having partnerships with Ireland and France. Well, that would be a bit dull and less of interest. So you really need to be trying to spread partners around between Northern Europe, Eastern Europe, Southern Europe, particularly if you're coming from the UK or Denmark or one of the Northern European countries. It's a good idea to have a Mediterranean partner or Eastern European partners involved in your particular project. Key principles about partnerships obviously reflect the commitment of the project being European in terms of the breadth of the partnership. New and different strengths, as I said before, different types of experiences will add to the dynamics of the project. Clarity in the structure and role of each partner. Now, it's absolutely clear that the application form now requires you to produce a project schedule with a row for each activity and columns for which partner, where the project activity is happening, what dates, the costs, and so on and so forth. So you'll have to do that schedule with your partners. It's a bit tedious, but at the end of the day, it's very useful, but of course it does provide you with all that sort of information. Enable partners to have a roughly equivalent role. This is there to make sure that projects are not unbalanced. I mean, they don't want projects that are simply one country projects pretending to be European. They want projects to be genuinely collaborative and working to help achieve the project's aims and objectives. I think that's fairly straightforward as well. Finding partners. There are some examples here of where you might find partners. I mean, there are lots of European networks. You can join one of those. There are national networks and agencies in individual countries. They're in different countries, but there will be an association of theatres or association of artists or whatever. You can go and visit their website and trawl through them. And they will probably have their website in their own language, obviously, but also in English. Tends to be the lingua franca of Europe these days. The contact points, the Creative Europe desk, for example, in the small countries in particular. No use going to the contact points in the large countries because they will not necessarily be able to recommend particular organizations relevant to you. But in the smaller countries, they may well be in a position to sort of say, oh, well, if you're interested in working in puppetry or this particular branch of visual arts, well, then you should go to A, B, C, and D. And you can get links from the European Commission websites to the list of contact points. Partner search databases, if they exist, then the relevant contact point or Creative Europe desk will have a link to the partner search databases for that particular program. Databases of previously successful projects. Again, the partners and the contact points will have lists of previously successful projects. European offices in local authorities and municipalities. Depending on your local authority and municipality, you may have access to a European officer who's quite useful in terms of the contacts they may have built up in other countries. That might be a good starting point. Some member states, regions and cities have an office in Brussels. I mean, we don't have as many of these from the UK as we used to have, but they do still exist, and they may be able to help either with contacts or putting you in touch with other people, or even hosting meetings in Brussels. It's on a practical basis, providing you with access to a meeting room and so on. And the Commission also organises meetings and so on for most, if not all, the transnational funds. You don't need to go to Brussels to find out the information. You can go to the various events run by people like us or by the contact points. But if you go to Brussels, of course, there'll be people there from all over Europe. And one of the reasons many of them will be there looking for partners. So it's one way of sort of, like blind date on a big European scale, helping people to find partners. Practical issues about partners. You can be any sort of organization. You just have to be legally recognized in your own country. So you can be university, local authority, profit-making, not-for-profit, large-scale, small-scale, and so on. You have to have been in existence for at least 2 years. That's absolutely crucial. All partners must be in existence for at least 2 years. And you must have a PIC code, PIC, Participant Identification Code. This can be created very easily. Organizations can go online anytime and create their PIC code. This is a new system the Commission has introduced, and it's quite a good idea. It means that the organizations have a standard reference point within the system. So when somebody is writing an application, all they need to do is enter the PIC codes and all the information will pop up automatically, which is extremely useful. It's very simple. There's nothing complicated about PIC codes. Natural persons, individuals can't apply for grants. We've talked about that already. So submitting an application, just a simple summary for the culture program. The deadline is the first Wednesday in October. You're informed in March of the following year. The start date has to be between May and December of that year as well. So if you're applying this year in October 2015, you will be informed in March 2015, and the start date will be between May and December 2015. And then you can add 1 to 4 years to get your end date. So you choose your start and your end date at what convenient to you. The Creative Europe desk for the Culture Programme is at the British Council. The contact person is Krzysztof Jankowski. That's the website. In fact, actually, I think the website has now changed. I think I've amended the website in the attachment, but that website will be redirecting for the time being. I think it's now creativeeuropedesk.uk.eu, but that's on the printout that I've sent you, or that I will send you. Finances and budgets, just one simple slide just to summarize the finances and budgets. Obviously, the applications have to be submitted in euro. The budgets are, as we've said earlier, small projects, 200,000 up to 60% of the budget. The Commission will give you $500,000 per year for up to 4 years, so 2 million being 50% of the budget. The rest is the match funding. The match funding can include income generated by the project. So it can include ticket sales, sales of publications, registration fees, merchandising, anything you can think of. This applies to the Culture Programme and some other programs, but doesn't apply to necessarily every program. Sometimes you cannot include project-generated income. The other match funding has to be generated by the project co-organisers, not necessarily equally. I mean, obviously, if you have a Norwegian partner and an Albanian partner, the Norwegian partner will be much better placed to be able to provide those sorts of resources. Own resources, obviously, if you have a wealthy partner who's got money sitting in their bank account, or maybe if you are a Arts Council funded organisation, you might be able to direct some of your Arts Council grant as match funding, if that's in your remit from the Arts Council. Grant, sponsorship, donation, so applying to other bodies for grants or sponsorship is one other source. And you can have seconded staff. You can't have contributions in kind, because that's not real money. But seconded staff is real money. These people will be being paid their normal salary or wage, but they're just being seconded to work on this project. So the proportion of their normal salary or wage can be included within the budget on both income and expenditure sides. So that is quite helpful. Okay, I'm just going to end by just going through the criteria. Now, what's happening in EU funding applications for the transnational funds is that they are simplifying the criteria. There are generally now just 3 or 4 overarching criteria. You are provided with the criteria. You know how much each criteria is worth in terms of the score that the jury members can give for that particular criteria, and they all will add up to 100%. And obviously within the application form, you'll be asked to address how your project is addressing these individual criteria. So the first criteria in the Culture Programme is the relevance. So this is a standard criteria. How relevant is your project to the criteria set by this particular programme? In the case of the Culture Programme, this is worth 35% of the score. So how are you relating? How does your project contribute to professionalisation, operating transnationally, circulation of cultural and creative works, improving access to cultural and creative works? How does your project relate to the 6 priorities, or the ones you've chosen rather? Which are the priorities you've chosen? How does your project relate to those, which are the ones we've seen earlier? So we don't need to go through those. Then at the bottom there, you'll see there are some additional criteria which haven't been mentioned before. Are there other priorities identified in the project, and how appropriate are they to the objectives of the programme? So what else are you doing in your project? Specifically, to what extent is the project producing results which go beyond the interests of the partners and direct participants and have long-term impact? So in other words, you may be doing a project that's going to be beneficial to the partners and those people coming along and taking part in the events or visiting or being audiences or whatever. But what greater relevance does this have? Now, this can be quite, again, this is important, but doesn't have to be hugely demanding. I mean, to go back to my example I gave earlier of a theatre or puppetry project in a disadvantaged housing estate, what you might do as a result of that project is sit down and create the sort of idiot's guide to producing that sort of project. And you could write a manual. And you could write a manual and have that manual translated into several different languages, European languages, and then make that available for download from the website of the project. And then tell Europe send that information to Europe to say, we've done this project, you might want to do something similar, here is a guidance to help you. The Commission would be very interested in that, and they would see that as a result which goes beyond the interests of the partners and has a long-term impact. And finally, this criteria of how complementary is the project to cultural actions implemented at national, regional or local level. In other words, you've told us how relevant the project is to the European criteria, but how relevant is the project to criteria within the member states of the individual partners? So does your, and it could be at national level or regional level or city level, whichever. Our project does also not just relate to the European criteria, but it relates to the criteria established by our Arts Council or our City Council or whatever it might be. It gives an opportunity for your project to be embedded not just in European aims and objectives, but also within the aims and objectives at your local level. Looked at that one. The second criteria is about quality. So the first one's about relevance, the second one's about quality, and this is quite common in other programs as well. 25% in this case. So this is about the quality of what you're actually doing. So how it's going to be implemented, how well thought through it is, your project plan, your outputs, your deliverables, the assessment you're going to undertake of what you're doing, how clear are the individual activities, your audience development strategy, the experience of the team taking part, their CVs, and so on and so forth. Criteria, again, standard across many programs, communication and dissemination. And there are three parts to this essentially. How are you communicating what the project is doing, so lots of people take part and benefit during the project? How you are disseminating the results of the project. So in what way are you disseminating the outcomes of the project? And thirdly, how well are you promoting the support you've received from the European Union in this particular project? And the final criteria is about the partnership, the quality of the partnership. So in a sense, also the project management. I mean, how well have you got these partners together and into a situation where it's clear that it's going to be well managed, that people are going to deliver the right thing at the right time, at the right place, within the budget, and so on and so forth. And also at the very bottom there, that criteria about the partnership going beyond the direct geographical neighbours of those people. And that's it. And that's it. Okay, so sign up for more information. We have that EU Arts Funding Twitter feed, the different opportunities. If it's a culture program, assess which strand is right for you, decide how ready you are. You could use the Am I Ready template if you want. Have a really good idea that's unique, innovative, different. Find and secure partners. Obviously those last two things about ideas and partners are not necessarily straightforward, but they are the real focus. Now, the next deadline is in October for the culture program, and for many of the other programs, their deadlines in September, October. So, you've got time. Some of the project deadlines, like for Erasmus, are not until next March, so that's plenty of time to be developing good ideas and finding good partners. We provide, as Euclid, a range of support and assistance. If you're interested in help with your application, then we can help in different ways. If you've got simple queries, then please don't hesitate to contact us about these particular opportunities we've talked about today. And we do have some downloads available for Connexus members, and we'll be increasing the number of downloads we have as well. Thank you very much. I'm now going to go back to the main slide just to see whether or not anybody has any other questions or comments that I can. Right, okay. Nicoletta has asked whether there are standard submission forms to help you structure your proposal. Well, yes, I mean, I think that there are two. Let me just. Right. I think there are a couple of points there. Depends what you mean by that question, Nicoletta. Sorry. There are application forms, and there is a standard application form for each program. There's no standard application form across the European Union, but the application forms are now quite similar. So the application form, there'll be a section that asks you about the partners, there'll be a section about the project, there'll be a section about the budget, and so on. So there's a number of standard sections. In terms of helping develop your application, We do provide some downloads to help people develop their applications, and we're going to be looking at increasing those over the next month or so to help people, more easily understand what's contained within the application form. The application form is usually not made available until a couple of months before the deadline, but either you can access the application form for the previous deadline, or if you contact us or the contact point, they might be able to send you the application form from the last deadline so you can have a look at it. Procedures, question about being similar through different programs. Yes and no. The structural funds are much more complicated, infinitely more complicated than the transnational funds. The structural funds are more complicated, and for example, one key difference with the structural funds is that they pay in arrears. So for the structural funds, you have to have fantastic cash flow in order to be able to manage a structural funds project, because generally they pay in arrears, or at least after you've delivered certain stages of the project. They certainly don't pay up front. The transnational funds, there is a similarity, okay? In most cases, they're an online process. They have those standard sections of the form. The detail of the form may be different from one program to another, but there will be the standard sections of the form about the applicants, about the project, the budget, and so on. So there is some standardization, and the criteria are now becoming standard in terms of the categories. So, the relevance of the project, the quality of the project, the communication dissemination, the partnership, all of those will be standard. And as I said as well, many of the programs are moving towards lump sum funding, where you don't put in a detailed budget, you simply sort of fill in certain criteria about the number of participants, distances, number of events, and so on and so forth, and that will produce an amount that you can then apply for. So there are some similarities across the different programs, but each one is separate in terms of they will have their own form and their own application process, but there are similarities between them. Okay, I think that's probably all for the time being. If you have any other particular questions or queries, then please don't hesitate to send me an email. We will be letting you know when we put some more additional information on the website that people might want to download and so on for the programs coming up. But thank you very much for listening to this rather intense couple of hours that we've had on the overview of the whole range of funding programs, and I hope it's been useful. Look forward to keeping in contact and hearing from you in the future. Thanks very much, and bye-bye.